and 10 verses in chapter 11. So 30 verses in all, and some of these are very self-explanatory and really don't deserve much comment, or I shouldn't say deserve, but they don't need. It's not necessary. The principles are pretty much clearly seen. Remembering that Solomon, as a king of Israel, was... is it too loud in here? Is it too loud? Does anybody feel it's okay? All right. I don't know why it feels so loud. Maybe because with less people, the sound bounces off that back wall more. Maybe that's what it is. Sorry. Remembering that Solomon, as a king of Israel, he was under command of God not to do three things. He was under command of God not to multiply horses, not to multiply wives, and not to multiply gold unto himself or to Israel as a king. That wasn't supposed to be his focus. And of course, we know that Solomon did all three of those things in complete decadence. I mean, he went over the top, complete opulence. He was the king that made silver worth nothing because they had so much gold. He was the king that had so many horses that they didn't probably have enough skilled riders to ride them. And he was the man, crazy enough as it sounds, that had 700 wives and 300 concubines. He multiplied all three of those things unto himself, and yet he goes down in history as the wisest man that ever walked upon the earth. He truly is, in my mind, an enigma. He, in my opinion, was the person that initially opened the door for complete, open idol worship in Israel to begin, because he would erect these altars unto his foreign wives. He was marrying all these women that were foreigners. They weren't from Israel, and thus they did not worship the one true and living God. They worshiped all these false gods, and to honor his little wifeys and keep them happy, he would erect these altars for their worship. But then we're told in Scripture as well that he also participated in that worship himself, not only condoning but also participating in, and thus being the example that he was to the nation, really opened the door for idolatry. And then of course after him the nation gets divided, right? There's the northern and the southern kingdom, and all sorts of bad stuff happens. So Solomon is such an enigma to me, and truly though we see much wisdom come from him and all the things he said, I believe in his older years he probably regret all that he did that was wrong and against the Lord. And he wanted to get back to where he used to be with the Lord. And so sometimes you see glimpses of that. And as we come to kind of the end of Ecclesiastes, you'll see him come full round back to really the only thing that matters, and that is the fear of God and walking and living for him. And we're kind of in an interesting place because we see him go through these experimental and existential things, talking about the things that he personally has gone through, experimented with, experienced, and all these things through Ecclesiastes he's talked about. And he's concluded that it's all vanity. He said, vanity of vanities, over 30 times through Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. It's all soap bubbles. As soon as it comes, it goes. It's not eternal. It doesn't last. Don't give yourself to it. Don't bother. He's been there, done that. Trust him. He's sparing you the pain. He's wanting to kind of get back to maybe where he once was with the Lord. And so he writes this, and I think in the end, when it all wraps up to that point of fearing God, we can see that clearly. But keep in mind, as he writes, a lot of this is wisdom from a human standpoint. And of course, I've reminded us all of this fact many times, and it might sound a little bit repetitious, but it's important to remind yourself of that while studying this book. This is wisdom from many times solely a human perspective, and thus it lacks the eternal perspective. And so you can't really fully depend on it. Though Solomon said these things, and it's in God's word, it's not necessarily wisdom for you and I apart from that heavenly perspective. So you have to understand that. A lot of good things in here nonetheless, though. So let's jump into chapter 10. Dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor, so doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. Speaking of somebody who has a reputation for being wise and for being honorable, and that reputation no doubt taking many years and lots of difficulties to achieve and to accomplish, and thus just a little bit of folly can ruin that whole reputation. And so he says he likens it to dead flies, or actually the Hebrew I think says flies of death, in perfume. And I don't know what that's like. I've never had flies end up in my cologne. We have sealed bottles these days, but evidently theirs were kind of in some container that maybe wasn't completely sealed, and which bugs can get into. And when they would get in, it would cause all sorts of rottenness and unsavoriness to occur. But I think it's an interesting thought to think of, that, when you think of the process of making these perfumes, especially in those days, perfumes were very costly items. It wasn't just like nowadays. And I would say maybe for the most part, they're pretty expensive today too. But I would say we have a lot more disposable income at our fingertips these days than they did back then. And to make it, the process of making it took a lot of physical exertion, a lot of effort to make these costly oils and ointments that people would put on to give off a pleasant, sweet smell. All of that effort could be ruined by a little tiny fly. All of that effort. And the same goes for all of that effort going into a good reputation. All of that effort over all of those years that you lived right, that you walked with the Lord, that you didn't compromise, and your reputation can just be ruined like that for one bad decision. And that's sad, because of course as Christians we know that there is forgiveness and there is restoration and there is redemption, right? Because our God is a God of grace. And even when someone like David falls, God restored him to his kingship again, though he was never fully the king that he was meant to be because of his sin. He had many consequences that he suffered because of his sin with Bathsheba. They played out over time. They didn't happen all to him immediately. But I think that we can definitely see there was restoration in his life. We can think about Peter. The Lord restored Peter. And we know that in our faith, there is that aspect of falling, failing, and then the Lord restoring. And we're so thankful for his grace. But that does not mean that people will handle us the same way the Lord handles us. People still might remember the fall more than the restoring. And that's a shame, but that's just how people's minds are. And so he's giving a really important piece of wisdom for us. Be sure that you don't just compromise here and there thinking that it won't matter, because it only takes a little bit of folly for your reputation to go down, just like that. And a good reputation is very costly. I liked what Derek Kidner said on this. He said, it takes far less to ruin something than to create it. And it's very true. I mean, you can do literally, just think of this building or any building, any house. If you do nothing to it, it takes far less to ruin it than to build it. If you do nothing with a building, it'll rot. If you don't keep it, clean, if you don't keep it heated, if you don't visit it and open it up, air it out, I mean, it'll literally rot. Just give a building like this 10 years untouched, it'll look like a ruin heap. And it takes less effort to accomplish that. It takes a lot less to accomplish ruin than it does to create something and to accomplish something that is building. A lot of effort goes into that. So we have to be mindful of this. I would also like to remind us that the scripture tells us who make bold professions of our faith to make sure that we walk circumspectly. In fact, Ephesians 5:15 is where we get that we are called to walk circumspectly. It's a very interesting word in the Greek. It's akribos, and we get the word acrobat or acrobatics from that Greek word. I mean, if you think of somebody who is an acrobat, they walk circumspectly. They walk very exactly. They don't make compromises with their steps while they're on the tightrope, or else they're going to fall. They walk very precisely, and they're very careful as to where they put their foot. And so, too, we should be very careful where we place our steps, how we choose to use our time, what we choose to invest our time in, and who we choose to befriend, and how we choose to dabble in this or that, and all the rest. And we're told to abstain from all appearance of evil in the New Testament. That's very important. That's very important to understand what it says there. It says abstain from all appearance of evil. It doesn't say abstain from all evil. Okay, that's true too, and that's good too. But it says even the appearance. If this that I'm going to do is going to appear to someone else as if it might be something evil, then I am not to do it, because I am representing the Lord wherever I go. You see, It's exactly the reason why David suffered such great consequence for his failure, because he gave reason to the heathen to blaspheme the holy name of God. And we don't want to do that. We want to walk circumspectly. And so when Solomon says, dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth the stinking savor, so doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor, man, we ask, Lord, please keep us free from little folly. Even the little folly. The stuff that, it's not a big deal. No. Little folly. Be careful of that. Be careful of that. Now, it goes on in verse 2. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left hand. One commentator said jokingly, I wonder if there's a political comment being stated here. If you're on the right, you're wise. If you're on the left, you're a fool. Just joking, sorry. I thought it was funny. Maybe you didn't. But anyway, the right hand was symbolic, metaphorically speaking, of skill, of strength, of that which was good and that which was right, and the left hand of all of the opposites of those things. And so, just plainly put, it could be said, the wise man's heart leads him aright, and the fool's heart leads him astray. It could be even said or paraphrased like that. I think it's a very interesting thing to consider, when we look at the Hebrew language, and we are in a poetical book, and you see these kind of idioms and metaphors repetitively given to us, and maybe they don't make much sense to us because we don't speak in that way, but indeed, the right hand and the left hand, even in our Lord's day, was symbolically viewed as the right good, well, that's your left, so the right good and the left bad. What did he say about the sheep? He's going to put them on what? The right hand. What did he say about the goats? He's going to put them on what? The left hand, referring to good and evil. Our Lord even did so. So that metaphor, that idiom, that it existed all the way into our Lord's time. And so when we read this, we can just look at this. A wise man's heart is at his right hand. That is, a wise man's heart will lead him aright. A fool's heart will lead him astray. And verse 3 goes on to say, yea, also, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool. And basically, this is a very funny verse. It's basically saying that a fool can't hide who he is, no matter where he goes. The best he can do to conceal himself as a fool is to keep quiet. But because he's a fool, it's inevitable that he's going to open his mouth at some point and reveal himself to be a fool. Wherever he goes, when he goes out, the discerning eye can tell he's a fool. I don't know how that is. I usually don't walk around, the city here and say that's a fool and that's a fool. I don't have that kind of level of discernment to tell who's foolish or not. But when people open their mouths, it's a little bit easier to tell. And you can discern, hey, what's foolish and what's wise, just by what somebody says or what they kind of agree to or what they follow. So, verse 4, if the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifies great offenses. This is an interesting one personally for me. I think I've said in the past from this pulpit that when I was young and working as a carpenter in New York, I had a shop foreman that was extremely just difficult to work with, and that's an understatement. I mean, he'd get mad at you and he'd throw pieces of wood at you, he'd curse you out for making the littlest mistakes, and I had to work in this shop by myself with him. And I just graduated from high school, and I was kind of new to the trade and everything, and I really was excited about getting into carpentry and wanted to start my own company one day, and this is who I get placed to work with. I mean, how demoralizing, just so, it was so difficult to go to work every morning. And I would literally sit in my truck and read my Bible, park it in the parking lot, and I'd read my Bible for 10 minutes before going in, and I'd bring my Bible with me and leave it on my workbench, and during lunch I'd read it, just because I needed to throughout the day, because my nerves were on edge. This guy was crazy. But I tell you what, every single day I wanted to leave. I wanted to quit. I wanted to throw in the towel The Lord gave me strength to remain and stay. And I remember this one day, it got so crazy. He was just cursing me out like you wouldn't believe. And I just finally said, you know what, I can't work under these conditions. And I just said, I'm going to go talk to the boss. I'm going to ask if he could shift me around in the company and place me somewhere else on another job site. And, see you later. And I started to walk out, and he called out to me. He said, stop. He says, I'm sorry. And he started to apologize to me. He's like, I'll be nicer. Just come back. And I was like, what? What is going on here? But I think, all of those months, as it says here, if the spirit of the ruler rises up against you, do not leave your place. I could have, the first time he cursed me out, I could have said just, I'm all in a huff and everything. He said, I get out of here. I'm worth more than this. I'm not going to let anybody talk to me like this. I'm not going to let anybody throw wood at me like this. I'm out of here. I deserve better. And instead, I just, by God's grace, and let me tell you something, it was not easy. My flesh wanted to run every single day, but God said, just stay. This man actually, after some time, after this episode, he truly did soften up. And after this episode, we started talking about the Lord on our breaks, because he would always see me read my Bible when I would eat my lunch. And he ended up giving his heart to the Lord. And I used to, after work, I'd go to his house and we'd study the book of James together. He asked, can we study the Bible together? I said, sure. Well, he said, well, what do you want to study? I said, well, I'm thinking about, let's study James, because you got a mouth, man. We got to get to James. We got to start addressing that mouth. It was just my young thinking. But it's just amazing what you say. It says here, but yielding pacifies great offenses. Sometimes just allowing the person to be a complete jerk to you in that moment, and just yielding to it, and just being apologetic, and just taking it on the chin, so to speak, it goes a long way. It's difficult, but it goes a long way. After a fashion, enough was enough, and I started to say, I'm out. But I didn't leave immediately. And I would ask you to hold on to that as a lesson. You never know who you might have as a boss that might just be tyrannical, but you want to be careful to just kind of walk out all in a tiff and in a hurry just because you're offended. Let it be for a little bit. Give it some time and let the Lord in there to work, because he might be wanting to use you to reach that person's heart. And now as we move on, verse 5, he sees in these verses, he speaks of discrepancies in places of leadership and amongst rulers. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceeds from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. Those that are not at all qualified, or they don't have suitable qualifications, are placed in, great dignity. They're placed in great places of leadership, and you see fools there. And then on the other hand, there's, as he says, the rich sit in low place, or those that are highly successful, highly prosperous, who actually are qualified to be, they're doing menial tasks in other places, in other realms of the kingdom. He's like, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. But he says, I've seen it, and it's a discrepancy. It doesn't make sense. He says, I've seen servants upon horses and princes walking as servants upon the earth. It should be the other way around. Everything's topsy-turvy. And then he goes on in verse 8, he that digs a pit shall fall into it, and whoso breaketh a hedge, a serpent shall bite him. Very plain and simple, right? If you, maybe it's not so obvious, the consequence that's stated here, but the plain meaning as you read it is clear. If you set a trap for someone else, it's going to spring back upon you. If you're putting a trap in someone's way to get them and to take them down or whatever, God says that trap, that very thing that you set to trap that person, it will one day come back to spring upon you. That's what's said here. And of course, remember, Solomon is speaking this from human perspective. It's not always the case, right? There are exceptions. People do get away with evil sometimes in this life, unfortunately. But the general principle and the general rule, the consequence of setting a trap for someone else, will be that one day it'll spring back upon yourself. And of course, maybe it won't happen in this time. but God will right all wrongs one day in the final judgment. And so whoso breaks a hedge, a serpent shall bite him. You know, a hedge in Israel's time, in the time that Solomon was writing, was very important. Property lines were not ever to be tampered with. I mean, according to the word of God, God said that the property boundaries should never be moved once they're set. And if you try to move it, you know, when your neighbor goes to bed, you move the hedge a little bit more into his property to gain a little bit more property for yourself. And he says that serpent that's in those rocks in that hedge or whatever it is, it's going to jump out and bite you. One commentator wrote this about that. He says, the unnoticed serpent was the image of lurking retribution. So it's going to come back to bite you, in other words, if you do that. Don't do it. That's not being a good neighbor. Don't go moving the fences around. Whoso removes stones, verse 9, shall be hurt therewith, pretty much similar to what we read in verse 8. And he that cleaves wood shall be endangered thereby. Don't go cutting down your neighbor's trees. It's just a good principle to live by. I mean, it doesn't need much commentary. And, you know, if I see my neighbor cutting down my trees, I'm going to be pretty upset about it, right? It's just common sense, so don't go doing it. But then on that note of cutting down trees, he talks about an axe. He says in verse 10, if the iron be blunt, and he do not whet the edge, then must he put more strength. But wisdom is profitable to direct. So this is a beautiful verse, actually. You know, we all need sharpening. We all need strengthening. We all need to be, you know, what do you say, just refreshed. And it's just like a tool. And I remember, you know, I had a skill saw, using it years ago, and I put just a steel blade in it. I wanted to try it out. It had no carbon teeth on it. It was just pure steel. I hit one little nail, and it just didn't cut straight after that. If you have carbide teeth on your blade, it'll take a nail and it'll still cut okay. But if it's just steel, the teeth are just ruined. And it's a nightmare to cut the rest of the day. I'm like, why did I put this dumb blade in that thing, you know? But you have to take it out, and steel blade, you just sharpen it. And then it works a lot better. I was too lazy, so I just threw it out, because I'm like, I need a different kind of blade with carbide teeth on it. But the point is, you know, if I kept working with that blade, it would be so foolish, because I'm working harder. And, you know, we have that old adage, right? Work smarter, not harder, right? This is this is the principle here. If an axe is dull and you keep using it, you're going to have to work harder to chop down trees. So go get it sharpened. Wet the edge. Go get it sharpened. But that speaks to us, doesn't it? I mean, as believers, we get worn out. We get tired. We get dull. And the way that we stay sharp is by staying in the Word of God, by staying in fellowship, in prayer, you know, walking with the Lord every day. We need to go to get sharpened each and every day so that we can be effective for His kingdom. And then it says, you know, wisdom prospers the way of success. So wisdom would say, sharpen the axe. It would prosper your way to success if you do that. Well, verse 11 goes on to say, surely the serpent will bite without enchantment, and a babbler is no better. This is also a very cool verse. I like this. You know, those snake enchanters, that they can put their hand on the top of the cobra's head, and they blow their little whistle, and they do a little dance, and then they get the snake to be kind of almost sedated, and they can touch the top of the serpent's head. But when the enchantment ends, the snake might get frustrated and bite. He wants to be enchanted. And when some snake gets disenchanted, then he's like, hey, I'm bored, I'm going to bite you. You're not distracting me. So this is what it's saying here is, and this is interesting because it's likened to a babbler, and he says, this person is no better. So here it is. If somebody comes to me and starts talking to me about someone else, at the moment, they're enchanted with me. For some reason, they like me, and they want to babble to me some gossip about someone else. Well, as soon as they're disenchanted with me, and they no longer think I'm so great, or they're bored with me, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go start talking to someone else about me. And that's what babblers do. And so what we want to make sure is when someone comes to you, to me, talking about someone else, is that we don't receive it. We don't listen to it. We turn it away. Because the likelihood of them going after that, talking to other people about you, is very great. The babbler is just the same as the disenchanted snake. They're going to bite. So don't listen to them. Don't give them the time of day. Just shut them down. Verse 12. The words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool will swallow him up. I think it was in Luke, we're told there, let our speech always be with grace and seasoned with salt. No, it's not in Luke. I have written a wrong address on there. Sorry. Somebody has to look that up. Correct me on that. That's not right. Sorry? Colossians, is it? Great. All right. Let's check after service and correct that. But, that's really what's being said here. Our words need to be full of grace, but it also says here, seasoned with salt. It's grace and truth, right? Jesus was full of grace and truth. He didn't kind of sacrifice truth just to be gracious. And when he was giving truth, he was also very gracious whilst giving it. And so there's a similar kind of thing being said here. A wise man's mouth the words, of a wise man's mouth are gracious. In other words, there's favor that comes to a wise man because his words are gracious, and the lips of a fool will swallow him up. In other words, they will bring folly back upon. The fool's words just bring trouble. Notice in verse 13, it goes on to say, the beginning of the words of his mouth, speaking of the fool, is foolishness, and the end of his talk is mischievous madness, or, raving madness. So you have the contrast of the words of the wise, which simply says the wise person will have favor upon him because he speaks graciously to people. Not sacrificing truth, but he speaks graciously to people. He gives out truth graciously. But the fool, the only thing he, peddles is foolishness, and it starts there, maybe with just meaningless foolishness. But it ends, as it says, in mischievous madness. So you don't want to listen to a fool. At the best, you'll be misguided. Verse 14. There's a lot about the fool in this chapter, by the way. A fool also is full of words. A man cannot tell what shall be and what shall be after him. Who can tell him? So, the fool just goes on endlessly speaking about stuff he doesn't know. He can't tell what he will be or what will be after him. But he still speaks as if he knows. He's a fool. Verse 15, the labor of the foolish wearieth every one of them, because he knoweth not how to go to the city. This is like just so frustrating when if you're ever in a place where you delegate tasks and you delegate a task to a fool. He can't handle the simplest thing. He doesn't know how to get it done. And it's not because he doesn't have training. It's not because it hasn't been explained. It's just because he's a fool. He's not managing his time correctly. He's lazy. He's not focused, whatever. Solomon's saying here, hey, man, a fool is like, you can't even ask him, hey, please walk from one end of the city to the other. He won't do it. He'll never get it done for you. So just go seek out someone else to help you. Don't even waste your time, because it says the labor of the foolish wearies everyone. It wearies everybody. Everybody's waiting on him to get it done, but he can't get it done. He can't even walk through a city. Verse 16, woe to thee, O land, when thy king is a child, and thy princes eat in the morning. That is, they use their privileged place to party and to live large, and they're not really working hard for the people. But, verse 17, blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in due season for strength and not for drunkenness. They participate in banquets, and they participate in functions which, benefit them, but they're also very diligent in serving the people that they have been appointed to serve. Blessed is that land that has leaders like that. In verse 18, by much slothfulness the building decays, and through idleness of the hands, the house drops through. And, I already kind of alluded to this earlier, talking about if you leave a house all by itself for 10 years, or even less than that in this country, because of such cold and freezing in the winter, you'll break pipes if you don't keep the heat on, and, all sorts of stuff can happen. If you just let something be, it just decays. And so, listen, when you gain, please understand, in gaining, there is maintaining that goes along with that gaining. And that's exactly why Chuck Smith used to always say that never strive to gain, because if you strive to gain, you will have to strive to maintain. If the Lord adds it to you, then you'll also have the capacity, because he'll give it to you, to take care of that which he's given. He's not going to give you something that's going to crush you. But, this heart of always wanting and needing more, striving to gain, striving to get bigger, better, all this stuff, you're just going to have to maintain it. And that maintenance alone, if you don't get to it, man, everything's just going to decay and fall apart. And then that which you strove so hard to get is just worthless. It's worthless now. So if you have gained something, know that it comes with maintenance. And I remember when we moved into this building from the last place, because the last place we were just renting a few rooms in. We didn't have any responsibility over any of the property. But when we came here, we had to, remodel a lot of this place and get it just somewhat presentable on a shoestring budget. And I think we did a pretty decent job for what we had to work with. But it came with we gained a lot, but it came with a lot of maintaining. And, there's the snow in the parking lot in the winter, and there's the yard, and there's the windows, and there's the floors, and there's the toilets. We didn't have to do any of that in the old place. We just rented the rooms and the hallways and the cleaning, and it was all taken care of. But we gained a lot here, and the Lord gave it to us. And thus, since we've moved in here, things have been taken care of. And, we're all the time looking at ways at how we can improve this place, but you have to understand we don't want to invest too much because we're only renters. So, it's kind of pointless you put money into this building, you never see it again. You never get it back out. So let's see, maybe we'll be able to buy it someday, or we'll move to our own place and buy something else or build something else. Who knows? See what the Lord has. Verse 19, a feast is made for laughter and wine makes merry, but money answers all things. So you got to decide what are you going to have? You're going to have money, or are you going to spend your money on the party? He says, yeah, okay, you could throw a great grand party for your friends and have them all over, but the next day you're going to be without any money, and you might want to think about saving your money rather than throwing a party. It's just solid wisdom. I don't know if Solomon ever had to worry about that because he had so much gold. I think it said that each year 660, it's a funny number, 666 talents of gold would come in year by year to Solomon. That's an incredible amount of gold. An incredible amount of gold. So I don't know if he ever worried about running out of money to party, but I think he's speaking to everyone else that doesn't have 666 talents of gold every year coming into their bank account, that you might want to think about where you put your money. And that kind of carries on into the next chapter. But before we get there, we have verse 20. Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber, for a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. I love that. This is where we get our saying, a little birdie told me. It comes from here. A little birdie was flying by and told me so-and-so. Is it true? This is where it comes from. And I think it's an interesting thing how, man, gossip just has a way of spreading. It's like wildfire, and you just drop a little bit of it, and it might even be, you think you're saying it in private, you think you're saying it in confidence to somebody. Suddenly, the next day it comes back to you, or the next week it comes back to you from somebody else, and it's circulated through a whole bunch of people to get to you from that person. And you're like, uh-oh. But it says, don't curse the king and don't curse the rich. Well, you don't want to curse your king. Back then it was important not to, because he held the power of life and death in his hand. And he didn't want to curse the rich either, because they also had a lot of power and influence in society, and they could do something to hurt you. So as we kind of leave chapter 10 and move on into chapter 11, we think about investments and how to properly invest, and just some certain principles. And I think we could relate these to us in a spiritual way. He says in verse 1 of chapter 11, and this kind of goes back to verse 19 of chapter 10, where do you want to put your money? Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. So, Solomon, he had a whole fleet, a whole navy that he invested in. And he sent those ships out, and many days later they would come back, and his investment was multiplied. So here is just, kind of cast your bread upon the waters. He's saying, send out your money, invest it properly, and you'll find in days to come, it'll come back to you with even more money attached to it. So, this is just speaking of how he's investing and then also being generous. Verse 2, give a portion to 7 and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. You want to be generous. You want to be giving to those in need. Give to 7. He says, no, you know what? Actually, give to 8 people that are in need. Just be generous. That's the whole idea, is just to, be generous. Be a hilarious giver, as the New Testament would call it. Find joy in being generous to others, especially to those who are in need. And then it tells us the reason why. Because you know not what evil shall be upon the earth in the future. You don't know what will befall you in the future. And those people that you have helped in the past will be there to help you when you're in need, because you've helped them. So it's just, again, it's where are you going to sow? Are you going to just kind of squander your money and hold it in and put it in and just lock it up and never, are you going to invest it? And I think the best way that we can invest our money, our talents, our time, whatever commodity you want to invest in, is in God's kingdom. It'll always pay back. It'll always pay back. If not in this life, in the next. Always. And so remember, God keeps track of your giving. And I think I've said before that, when it comes to poor people, especially poor people on the streets, I have a policy that I will not give any cash to those people. I won't give any coin or cash to those people, because many of them, unfortunately, have addiction to some kind of drug or alcohol, and the likelihood of them spending that cash on that drug or alcohol is very high. But what I do is, as soon as they ask me for something, is I'll say, well, you know what, there's a restaurant right there, there's a grocery store right there, can I take you to get some food? I'll sit down and eat with you. Let's go. And many times they'll just say, no, I just want cash. And then you know that they're not wanting it for food. But be open to giving them food, let's go eat. I'll sit down and eat with you, and then hopefully lead you to the Lord, just try it. But it is a good principle to live by, because many of the homeless people, they just don't, unfortunately, they have a lot of addictions, and we want to be careful not to feed those, but we want to feed them with food. They have needs. And I think that just that human kindness, that human touch, it goes a long way. And then being able to share the gospel with them, I think it's just a wonderful thing. But be generous. It'll come back to you. God will bless you for it. He keeps track of that. Then in verse 3, if the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if the tree fall toward the south or toward the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it shall be. I don't know if that's not stating the obvious. If there's clouds that are full of water, it's going to rain. If a tree falls towards the north, there it shall be. It's really, that's all he's saying. And I guess, the point of it is, that's just the way it is sometimes. You can't help the rain, and you can't help the tree that falls, and wherever it rains and wherever the tree falls, that's just the way it is. And that's just how life is sometimes. You just got to work with what you got. And then in verse 4, kind of connecting these thoughts, he that observes the wind shall not sow, and he that regards the clouds shall not reap. And I think it's important to kind of use that word regard in the first clause of this verse, he that regards the wind. If you regard the wind and you kind of regard the clouds, you will never get out and till your land and sow your seed, because you're going to be worried that it's going to rain. Well, it looks like a bad day. It's like, man, just get out there. Like, who cares if it starts raining? You got to get the seed in the ground. Go for it. And then in verse 5, as thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child. Notice how it says with child. It doesn't say with cells or with fetus. It says, with her that is with child. Okay, the Bible's clear on that. And even so, thou knowest not the works of God who makes it all. Don't let the wind and the threat of rain, don't let it slow you down. Because you and I both know, especially living in Finland, and I'm from upstate New York, we used to, I think it's still a running saying. I haven't been back there in so long, but we used to say, if you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes. And the forecasters, the meteorologists, they were constantly wrong. They would predict the weather tomorrow, and they wouldn't get it right. They'd probably 50% of the times wrong. And you know what it's like here. When we had our church work day where we were just cleaning up the yard and everything, they predicted thunderstorms that day. It was beautiful. It was warm and sunny. We grilled outside. It was perfect. They were wrong. So, hey, you don't know what the Lord's going to do. So when you wake up in the morning, you see clouds and the wind's blowing, just get out there. Just trust the Lord. Just go for it. You got to get the seed in the ground, or else you're not going to have a crop. So sow, invest, go for it. Don't let these things of life that happen anyway stop you. You got to keep going in life. In the morning sow thy seed, verse 6, and in the evening withhold not thy hand, for thou knowest not whether shall prosper. You don't know which one, the sowing in the morning or the evening, will prosper, either this or that, or whether they both shall be alike good. You have pretty decent odds here, because God's with you, you're trusting in him, you're being diligent, you're working, just go for it and see what happens. I'd rather try and fail than not try anything at all. So often in life, especially when you try something in life and hardship comes your way as a result, the temptation is to get cynical and to say stuff like, man, I'll never do this again. Well, why not? We have to hold on to the Lord. We have to have hope. We have no reason to doubt him. We have no reason to worry about his love or his faithfulness to us. Hey, it might have been hard. You might have failed, but at least you tried. You were someone who tried something in life. That's important. Just go for it. Trust in the Lord. He's with you. If the bottom falls out and the whole thing falls apart, he's going to be there to pick up the pieces. And just get up and keep going. Don't worry about it. That's life. That's just how it goes. The tree falls to the north sometimes, and then it falls to the south, and sometimes it rains. That's just life. It's just life. Just get on with it. May the Lord just help us when we feel like giving up. In verse 7, and this is interesting because it talks about aging. 7 and 8 does. Truly the light is sweet and pleasant thing it is for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man live many years and rejoice in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that cometh is vanity. You're young, and man, how wonderful it was when you were young to just wake up and enjoy the sunlight in the morning. You could see clearly and everything, but when you get old, there's going to be many days of darkness because your eyes start to fail you. I was actually, this morning when I sat down at the desk, I was starting to read and prepare for a meeting I had earlier, and I started rubbing my eyes. The words were blurry on the page, and I started thinking, do I need reading glasses? And then, ironically, today I'm moving through this chapter, and I come across this passage, and I'm like, oh, that's funny. Maybe I should go get my eyes checked. Because, get up there in age and things start to weaken and you need a little help, a little external help. So, it's just talking about aging, how sweet it is when you're young, and hardship can come later on. It says an interesting thought here in verse 8. If a man lives many years and rejoice in them all, he's had a good life. It doesn't matter. He's still going to age, and his body is still going to get weakened over time. That's just the natural process. And then that's why he concludes, all that comes is vanity. That's again, he's looking at life from purely the human perspective, without God in the picture. That's kind of the viewpoint here. Now, verse 9 and 10 to close. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, because you will get old someday. So rejoice in your youth. Enjoy it, in other words. How many people have told us that, right? My grandfather, he used to tell me that. He's the only grandparent I had. So, my grandfather used to say that to me. Enjoy your younger years. He would tell me, Bobby, listen, when I was a teenager, he's like, if you ever want to go to dance lessons, I'll pay for them. What? I'm like, dance lessons? I was athletic growing up. I couldn't imagine myself dancing, though. I can't forget about dancing. He's like, no, listen. He's like, trust me. Because when you get older, you go to a lot of weddings. You're going to need to know how to dance. I never learned how to dance, and I miss out on so much, Bobby. He's like, I'll send you to dance lessons. You just got to enjoy life. I was like, I'm all right, Grandpa, thanks. But he used to say, you need to just enjoy it while you can, because it goes fast. He used to say it all the time. And it's true. It is true. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and woman, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart. Let's just come back to that. And in the sight of thine eyes, but know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. Very important how he finishes that verse. Because it's pretty broad. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. In other words, everything you desire to do, just do it. If it feels good, do it. No. But then he has to bring it back home. But remember, you're going to stand before God someday. So choose what you want to do in your youth wisely, because you're going to have to stand before God someday. I think that's great. Therefore remove sorrow from thy heart and put away evil from thy flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. He's just got that hopeless attitude, that hopeless mentality through this whole thing, because, again, he hasn't introduced the heavenly perspective yet. We will get to that next week in our final chapter, chapter 12, or actually not next week, in weeks to come, because next week we're having a break. No Bible study next week. So let's stand for a closing word of prayer. And, would you guys, do you have to run really quick? Do you have to leave now? I'm asking because I was wondering if you can come up and do a song again. Could we do that finished song again? I thought it was really... Yeah, I'm looking at you because I know that maybe if you gotta get home or whatever, if you guys don't have to get going.